Um, hold on. Let me. This app is so jank.
You can keep talking. We can cut the tension. I think it's okay.
Well, I was just hoping to play music the whole time, and then like. No.
Maybe I tripped something.
Yeah. God. I'll just rap. Hi. We'll start as soon as Ryan is back. He's leading it, yeah. I'll read for like 5 minutes, and then Ryan's gonna ask me a bunch of questions. I'll say some stuff, hopefully give you guys enough to ask questions about, and then I'll sit over there and sell books and play music, and we can all hang out until we get bored. The way this book works is it's all like short fragments, different stuff continuously, so it'd be kind of hard to read all at once. So I'll just read one. It's called The Bookstore. The sign out front says, "Event in progress. Please be mindful." When I walk in, the person behind the register glances up and smiles. There are new releases to my right. I don't recognize any of them. They're mostly hardcover. Never got that. Seems worse. New nonfiction, staff picks, small presses. Down a few shelves, someone's doing a reading. Whence the penis disassembled. Scattered applause. It's all adults, but they're sitting in the kids section. Thank you. I have 2 more. I wrote this one a few weeks ago, so it's still kind of fresh. It's called Another Pussy Poem. Respect the trans bereft of plans and sex. I don't. I don't respect myself. Oh no. I guess, no flex. I do suspect my hectic mess is flow. I'm lit on couch betwixt the house. A certain pout affixed my mouth. My gout, I don't have gout. My gout blessed piss in bladder bound. You don't have gout? Ran out or out, I guess, unsure, unbound. I piss on not the couch. I have a pussy queen, so hark the sounds of splattered piss. Miss, amidst this shit, a mischievous miss scene too. Body bitch, I body bitch, my body is mine, not mine, is mined, not mined, qua me. Some hesitation, then scattered applause. Thank you. This last one is called Mac. Mac, aka that mad fat man, attacks a flapjack stack. Mac gags. Ack. Al man. Damn. Al, a small, half-balled, large ball, snaps. Man, Mac, a stack, and a trash axe half-ass claptrap. Thwack. Mac slaps that lard ball hard as a czar's law. Bars all slack jaws. Mac, you whack cad, barks Art, and Mac's fast arms an axe that damns Art's lax alarm. Man's hand lands fast, and Art's all salt. As Art balls, Mac stands and calls. Y'all all talk, y'all all stink. Y'all all small shafts can't slam a skank. Glam ass, mad ass, ya sad sack scram. At ass wrapped grams a crank. Ya whack, crap, can't grasp Mac. And that barb's an all barb brawl spark. Hark, a clang, a bat swang, psalm sang, and sharp dangs. As brash bats bang gats at rag-clad abs. Mats, brads, angs. All laws hang as glass and man fall. At last, at half past, that brawl thaws. Damn, man, a man drawls. Flags half-mast and carcass stank wafts. Bars rank, a graph, a map. Man's wrath, Mac stands tall as SWAT vans call. Hand grasps a last Pall Mall. Mac draws. And as SWAT arms blast at Mac, a madman's last act. What man? A bad stack's a bad stack. Some applause. The moderator introduces the next poet, who's carrying what looks like a large scroll. There's other stuff, but it won't make sense without the plot. Thank you. My whole deal is I want to be a rapper, but I'm this, so.
Thanks, Isabel.
No
problem. Where do I start? How did you get to that rap, that poem, essentially?
Yeah.
I think that'll also feed into the question of like, what was the process of writing this book generally?
Yeah, the first poem I wrote for a writing group that's mostly all poets, and I found very intimidating for like 3 years because I have no idea what to talk about with poetry, so I just psychoanalyzed all their speakers, but I guess it was always them. I don't know. One of them's here, so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Shout out to Oriana. She holds that shit down.
And all your psychoanalysis is very accurate.
Thank you. Yeah. Oriana runs that shit like the Navy. So that one I wrote for them, and it was like an intern between prose projects. I thought I would try being a poet. The other one, the Mac one, I wrote in college actually for like an assignment where you had a restraint or like a constraint, you know? So I could only use A's, I think was the thing in that one. There was actually a third one that was like an MF Doom pastiche, but then it was like, yeah. It was too on the nose, like thematically, so I swapped it out. Yeah, basically the process was, this is my second book. This is the first one, School. It took me like 6 years to finish, and I thought, I don't want to do that again. So then I was thinking I should probably do something very different. So I kind of just took everything I did in the first book and then did not quite the opposite, but like the dialectical opposite, you know? Yeah, so like School, for example, is very psychological and it doesn't have a main character. So it's like a novel in stories. There's like 12 chapters. Each chapter is a different protagonist. It's mostly about being mentally ill in different forms. This book is one protagonist. It's in first person. She has like no interiority, more or less. She just kind of looks at shit and is like, wow, a bus stop. Crazy stuff happens at the bus stop. And part of that was like, yes, literally. You should read this book. It's like 80% on the bus. Yeah, and I wanted to like live differently, so I was like, it'd be kind of fun to walk around and look at stuff on the bus.
Did the character's lack of interiority, was that something you had established beforehand, before you started?
Yeah.
Like you told me the process before of like just rigorously and like obsessively like noting down on an app, on your notes app, everything that you were encountering.
Yeah.
So that came first before?
Yeah, I knew I wanted to do something with no interiority, and then I started taking notes on stuff I would see. And a lot of this stuff I would recontextualize, so like certain anecdotes. There's one in there where she's at the botanical garden, and there's like a dad and his kid who's like, 3 or whatever. And his kid drinks something and then sighs really dramatically, and then the dad is like, oh, that's nice, I should try that. And then he drinks and he's like, oh, that was awesome. And that just like happened to me at a coffee shop, but I was like, okay, I can just move it. Yeah, there's this album called Spirit of Eden by Talk Talk. And I was listening to it a lot when I started. And the way they did that is the two guys, they had 3 albums that were quite successful and commercial, and then they made this 4th album that they were so sure was going to be like massive commercial hit. And they're like, what's the way to record a massive commercial hit? You bring in a bunch of session musicians and have them record like hundreds of hours of music in the dark with oil lamps, and then you chop it all up and make a beautiful album. And they're like, this is a fucking blockbuster, and it flopped. And I was like, that's me as well. I'm also successful and British. And then, no, it's very critically acclaimed. Everyone loves this album. Absolute banger. You should all listen to it. But I thought that was cool. So I, did the equivalent of like making this giant list on my phone called Anecdotes. And then I would just take down stuff on the bus. It's a cool way to live. I highly recommend.
Yeah.
You feel very in touch with the city.
Yeah. Speaking of, like, the city comes through so clearly in this book. As I've only lived here for like a year and a half. but as someone who also takes the bus, as someone who encounters, people rifling through recycling bins or avoiding shit on the street or various like stickers or whatever, that granularity of experiencing the city really shines through. So my compliments on that at the very least.
Thank you.
Let's see.
Do you want to know about the Marxist theory that backs that up?
Well, now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, of course. Right, so there's this guy, Frederick Jameson, and basically he has this idea that like I have found very useful and that I think people who don't write fiction never think about, which is like people just assume you can do whatever the fuck you want, and that's only like 60% true. So like one example is if you want to write a detective story set in the city versus in the suburbs, like he calls it the raw material of the work, right? But like just plot wise, if you had someone running around the suburbs, they'd have to do really different stuff, right? Like the private detective is a cool figure because they don't have a social class, really, at least the original 1930s noir guy, like Humphrey Bogart or whatever, can just walk around and he can be rich and he can be poor, and so he can see the entire stratification of class society and then see all this stuff.
Is the detective in this novel a weed dealer?
Yeah, so I should say the plot, shouldn't I? She sells weed, that's her job, and the novel starts with one of her clients who's a novelist gets murdered. It's the characters, they're killing her, and because it's metafiction, and so she's like trying to figure out, she has like a ambiguously important relationship with this novelist, and the novelist dies. She's kind of fucked up about it. Her best friend is a rabbi, but rabbis can't do stuff on Shabbat, and this rabbi likes to smoke weed, so she comes over on Friday nights and rolls him spliffs and lights said spliffs, and then they smoke weed together, and he's like an asshole to her, and I think that's what being a rabbi is probably all about. I don't know. Unfortunately, I don't believe in God or Israel, and I am myself fairly anti-Semitic in a woke Marxist way, so they won't hire me, but like I'll try freelance if you guys want to do it later. Anyways, where was I talking? Oh, Frederick Jameson, for sure. Yeah, so there's different stuff, right? Like the first novel is about Stanford, more or less. Stanford is very geographically isolated, and everyone there is the main character, so that enables a certain kind of writing, right? Like to get into a school like that, you literally have to narrativize your life into a personal statement. 18 years I was the main character, this is why, let me in. And then you do that, and then the campus novel is awesome because everyone's in one place, and that's so much easier. But like you can't do that in a city unless it's like a really long novel, and I didn't want to write that. So, like you have to write in a different way depending on what the like actual thing you're writing about is, So I feel like the form of this novel and all the fragments and stuff comes out of like how I experience living in a city where it's a lot less continuous. You're not like in college, you're bound to a certain timeline, right? Like it's like freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. So there's a narrative there. You have an end date. You're tied to a certain like rhythm, and all that's pretty narrative. But like in a city, when you're working a job and you don't have kids, you're not tied to like any schedule, right? You just experience the city. It's like I'm on the bus one day, I'm on the bus the other day, I'm smoking weed and looking at beans in a grocery store, like So it's very fragmentary, but I feel like that's just kind of what it's like. Yeah.
I will say the book, in the sections of the book that become a slightly less fragmentary, is when the narrator encounters, so one of the things that narrator encounters is they become part of what's called a character study. And character is a substance in the book.
Not a drug.
Not a drug. A substance in the book whereby if you handle it, or it eventually becomes a ring, if you twist the ring, you can essentially enter the world of a person that you're looking at. You could be entering ad copy, so an ad you might see on the bus, you can enter that world of that ad. And for fiction, you can enter like the fictional world of the piece of fiction. And the sections of the book that I found were the most like coherent, in the sense of like there was a kind of arc. You were sitting there for an especially long period of time, was when the narrator encounters these fiction sections and is able to sit with them for quite some time. Kind of leads me to another, like, I know it's not a drug, and I call it a drug in my notes, but I know it's not a drug. But both your novels feature substances that kind of make reality more real. So in School, there is a drug that reveals like the labor and the human lives that are concealed in commodities. So for example, if one character is talking on their cell phone, they've ingested this drug, and suddenly their phone is sprouting like fingers and hands of like children in like the Congo who are mining like rare earth minerals, as an example. And as the characters, the substance allows entry to like other worlds, like I said, people, ad space, fiction. What is the narrative power of these substances? Like either within the world of the books themselves, or in the real world, so-called, like the meat world.
That makes sense. But like one thing that happens in this book is when she goes into specifically written fiction. So she gets the ring, right? And the ring lets her. I'm just gonna spoil the whole book.
Basically, like, yeah, she
goes up to the character study the first time. She's holding the big obsidian sphere and looking at a magazine cover of a Popeyes. And then she like enters into the Popeyes, and so she like gets fries. And is like, oh, these taste fine. And then she pops out, right? And she's like, what the fuck? And then it's like increasingly kind of the next one. She like enters into like a mecha anime. She watches some robots fight and a zombie thing. And then by the third time, they give her this like unpublished story. And when she starts going into literary stuff, the style of the narration changes. So like her default style is very like flat, short sentences, rhythmic stuff. Pretty familiar to anyone who's read like a contemporary fiction. That's kind of the mode. But then she starts going into like, so the dead novelist has a distinctive style. Spoilers, I'm the dead novelist. So it's like, what would happen? The first half of School is in a very particular style that's kind of like a blend of a lot of stuff. And I didn't want to keep writing that way, but it's kind of fun to write that way. So I was like, what if I fake wrote that way? And so the dead me in the book, that style is like an exaggerated version of what's in School to like demarcate it from her default style. And so a lot of the jumping in and out of the fictional worlds lets you do this thing where you can kind of play with style. So she like goes into a Jane Austen book, for example, and leaves out a bunch of edibles, and then goes to the bathroom, and then the Jane Austen sisters eat the edibles, and they're like, and then they go to a ball together, and the Austen sisters are like roasting all the like bachelors, at the ball. But part of the experience of that is like when you read a Jane Austen book now, and you're entertaining that, right? And then you like stop reading it and go to the Popeyes. It's like, it's a, what's the word I want? Tea. Yeah. No, it's like very disorienting, right? Because the idea, like, I feel a lot of people, like what I was saying about like, it comes out of it. Like some people, when they start writing literary fiction, just like look at the thing they like from whatever time period and then just try to like apply it directly to now. So it's like, what if I wrote like Dickens today? Or what if I wrote like Flaubert today? And it just sounds bad. Like not bad, but like,
it's like ahistorical, or it's like
Yeah,
totally decontextualized.
it's like you're clearly imposing it from the top, right? And so like part of the reason to do this was to make you feel that, of like you go into Moby Dick and then you come out of Moby Dick and you're like, no, I want to get a coffee and ride the bus. And it's like Moby Dick doesn't make sense now, like writing like that doesn't make sense. But we live in an incredibly like everything is very reified, right? To use the Marxist philosophy term. So like you experience everything as things. You were saying like with the labor hidden in commodities, right? If you like looked around here and thought about the amount of labor that it took to create this bookstore, and you really thought about like pulling that out, you would experience the totality of global social economic relations every single time, right? Because it's like, here's a chair. Think about the guy who designed the chair. Everything he ever knows is like the product of like 1,000 years of, you know, and you just pull that out and then you go fucking insane all the time. And I feel like you can't do that, because if you tried to do that, you would be like delusional and insane all the time, like being on drugs, right? I feel like people do acid and do this shit all the time. So like to answer your question, like I feel like drugs are useful in a narrative because it lets you fuck around with the style in a way where it's like, yeah, well, you know, you gotta do fun like stylistic stuff where you like have crazy long sentences and pastiche styles, but it's also like permission to think thoughts you're not supposed to think normally. I think that's like why people sometimes like getting high, you know? And part of her job as a weed dealer, weed courier, she says, in San Francisco, she's always like delivering to people who don't smoke weed or like are new to it, and they're always like, what if I get scared of the TV? You know? And her advice is always remember it's supposed to be different, which is, you know, I feel like a lot of people get high and then they freak out that everything is different. And it's like, okay, you smoked the weed that makes things different, you know, like, like what did you think was gonna happen? So yeah, that's what she's always saying to people. That was pretty rambling. I don't know. Maybe I should have smoked before.
Is all this making sense to people? Is this entertaining?
Yeah,
That's okay.
well, they're laughing. I mean, that's the main thing. Yeah.
We're doing great. Let's see. What other questions have I got? Okay, you also have a website called the Bartleby, bartleby.life, is that
Yeah.
right? Yes. It's like a blog. You've written several pretty excellent essays in there,
Thank you.
I think. There's an essay you have on there called Can We Help Ourselves? And in that you quote, it's kind of about Marxism and self-help as a literary genre. And you quote Andrew Pendakis's 2024 book, Living a Marxist Life.
Mm-hmm.
I have the quote in photos because I have things prepared. If those of us on the left want to win, we need to become masters of seduction, to be the kinds of people that others find joy in. And you go on to say that you're not a very seductive person, but
That was the old me. It was before I got the nails, you know.
we've arrived.
Anyways, that was cool.
Lasted a long time. I think.
Yeah. We'll
is
add it
To the list
to
of
the tasks.
This is the time to break the couch.
Yeah.
We'll take a breath. Do you think the narrator in the book is seduced like this in It's the Characters?
Wait, seduced by who?
By... Did I think this question through?
I can riff if you want.
Let's see.
I feel like the Pendakis book is weird. It's like a weird book because he's trying to write a Marxist self-help book, which is like, I actually think a kind of good project. I forgot who I was talking to in the bookstore about this, but like, yeah, everyone's anti-self-help for reasons that don't make that much sense to me. I actually think that's a really good way to live. Probably the main way. Like, I feel like a lot of people now read these kinds of this stuff, and they read it in a pretty like isolated way where it's like mostly a big problem is that the novel is a very like institutionalized art form in school, right? So like it's the one you read in class. Most people don't take like painting classes or ceramics classes or whatever. So I feel like the main way people engage with literature now is very academic. What is the message of the book? I need to write a book report kind of thing, which is fine, I guess, but like there are definitely other ways to read that are more interesting, I think, like, you know, how to be alive and stuff, important things. So like there's a weird thing where I think a lot of people, particularly online, where there's a lot of literary community stuff, are very dismissive of people who read self-help. And that's because a lot of self-help is like total, you know, I don't want to say like predatory, but it's like you exploit people's desire to improve their life by selling them bullshit. So that like that essay starts with a review of a book called How the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, a counterintuitive guide to living a good life or something like that. It's by this dude, Mark Manson. The book's actually literarily fairly interesting. It has like a nice collection of guys he references, like Camus, Bukowski. I kind of think the whole book is a little bit ripping off certain aspects of David Foster Wallace without saying it, but that's a little bit like if you guys know the tweet that's like, person who's only seen The Boss Baby watching their second movie. This is just like a Boss Baby. But okay, literally, whatever. We can get into it later. But he's doing the thing like, DFW was an interesting author because he was like trying to figure out how to use literature to live life, right? I don't know if you read that essay on there called I Am Not David Foster Wallace.
I did. I have
Pay attention.
I have huge blocks of text from that on my phone.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, so what happened there is I wrote an essay 2 years ago called The Limits of David Foster Wallace, which was like me being annoyed that whenever I would publish writing, people would just be like, wow, she thinks about suicide a lot and has a penis, so she's probably just trying to be David Foster Wallace. And it was like only a little bit true. But there are other people who like long sentences and think about suicide, like Virginia Woolf, who I think about all the time. But it's like, it's annoying, right? To be like in that vulnerable state of transition where you're like anxious about stuff like this, and then have everyone like compare you to men and be like, no, actually I have a quite rich, diverse, woke group of artists I consider, you know? And like, my syntax is way more Virginia Woolf than David Foster Wallace, you fucking fools. Anyways, so I got kind of angry, and then my thing about David Foster Wallace is that like no one wants to talk about the fact that he killed himself. Oh, so I meant to say this earlier. I'm probably going to talk about suicide a lot, so if that like bothers you, feel free to leave. If for whatever reason I won't take it personally. But like I spent a lot of time very suicidal, right? So like that is like school comes out of that. This book is mostly about like dealing with like the recovery of that. Like the kind of plot is like she drops out. This isn't all explicit in the book, but she drops out of college after a suicide attempt. And so the reason she delivers weed is that she just wants to live like a fundamentally stable life, right? And she's like realized the way to do this is to like have a routine, do something that's not that intense, smoke a lot of weed and ride the bus. And I think that's like an admirable and good life. Her asshole rabbi friend disagrees. And so she's always kind of like beefing with him. And they're like smoking weed together, and he's like being annoying and a rabbi, and he's like, don't you want more out of life? But I think that was kind of my experience, right? Of like post-college stuff where it was like, I spent a long time very suicidal and I didn't want to do that anymore, so I had to limit my life in certain ways, which was good then. And then, you know, once you get past it, you start living differently. But like with DFW, right, like all his writing is about like using literature to be alive, and he's very explicit about this all the time. And if you're like a mentally ill 15-year-old like I was, and you're like looking to books for answers, then it's kind of this conflicted thing, right, where it's like, here's someone who seems to have experienced many things I've experienced, who seems to have like used literature in interesting ways to get past it. And then he like did everything you might want to do as an aspiring writer career-wise, right? Like he's David Foster Wallace, but then he kills himself. And then like no one talks about this because most people in the literary world who are approaching him are not mentally ill in that way. So they experience it from the outside, right? And it's like inconvenient to think about him in that way if that's not the problem you approach him with. Like, you know, it's the classic thing where it's like, you know, black writers address black issues, Jewish writers address Jewish issues, but then that becomes quite murky with like disability, right? Particularly mental illness and stuff, where it's like people want the universal lesson, and it's like I actually think a lot of his writing is very, very specific to like a particular experience of being bipolar, particular relationship to like gender and stuff. And it's like it was always interesting to me to like have my interest in him categorized in a certain way when I felt it was actually like quite a different thing. And I think the way I framed it in that essay was something like people like to put that in a box a bit, like the mental illness suicide stuff, where it's like, then you don't have to engage it, right? Like if you do The Death of the Author, it's a French essay from the 60s by Roland Barthes, that academics use because it's like productive for them not to think about how authors are real people, right? Because you separate it and then it's like you can say whatever you want if the author's intention doesn't matter. Just fine, but it's like, you know, we write these books for reasons.
Did that affect the decision that the author in this book yourself?
No. I just thought that would be fun. And then also, like, I feel like, sorry, it's kind of rambly. I feel like a big part of this novel, It's the Characters, was about like doubling. So like, the way I wrote it was like imagining what if I had done something different at 19 and dropped out of school. And so she's me, but then the novelist is also me. You know, everyone's me. It's my novel. Having a good time. Yeah. Am I having trouble just like answering your question?
No, I'm having trouble asking questions.
All right, do you want to talk about rap?
If you want.
Yeah. Well, that was the other thing. Is like everyone's like, you want to be David Foster Wallace. I was like, actually, I want to be Amy Winehouse, and Amy Winehouse wants to be a rapper, but like, you guys haven't figured this out. Yeah. No, I did want to be Amy Winehouse. Well, sort of. But like, I feel. I mean, rap is really interesting from questions of identity, right? Like MF Doom, a rapper I quite like. We were talking about the pastiche earlier. He has like 6 personas. There's like Doom, there's like Victor. Well, all right, so he starts out as a rapper in the 90s. His brother he raps with, his brother dies. He young, very tragic. He disappears. Then he like comes back with like a mask. The metal-faced Doom, right? He's riffing on a comic book character. And so like a lot of his stuff is about like this play with identity where he's like different personas. One of them's like a giant dragon, I think, King Ghidra. And like all rap is like this, right? Where they're all playing personas and versions of themselves. It's basically like drag for men in some way. Which is like super interesting, but a lot of people don't. They like read rap very literally, I feel like. And when I was in college, I was like obsessed with rap music. Like I would listen like 4 hours a day minimum. And then I would walk around thinking about it all the time. One time I went into this like creative writing professor's office hours and he asked me what I was doing and I told him I was trying to freestyle in the shower. And then he tried to make me do it. Okay, this dude was really, yeah. And then he was like, do you want advice about love? And then I called his bluff. And then I said, yeah. And then I laid out the situation and he gave bad advice. Anyways, I was thinking a lot about rap music. So like school, there's a lot of identity stuff. That novel climaxes with it starts with a self-immolation on campus. There's a video of a woman self-immolating. And it gets sent to someone at a lunch table from an anonymous email. And then they kind of process it as a group. And they're like, is this real? Is this fake? Is capitalism real? They're having this like dumb bullshit argument, which is what being in college was like. It's what being on Twitter is like. And then over the course of most of the rest of the novel, that's in the background as characters just kind of like do college shit. And then it comes to a head midway through the novel, and then there's a long section that's like essentially the suicide note of the person who self-immolated. And so they're sitting on a couch and someone gets an email with the note and then they read it. And there are many characters in the start of school that are like parts of my personality that I like fragmented out and then blew up into a big one. And then I do that again, but then I like make it very autobiographical and like use my like old name as the character's fake name. She's online, like it's a bunch of stuff where I was trying to like bait people into thinking this was me, but then it wasn't me. And that was all coming out of just like listening to a lot of rap music and thinking about that. Yeah, and caring a lot about like flow and stuff, and, like sentences. Yeah.
You've started work on your third project very recently.
Yeah.
What do you think will it be something that is dialectically engaging with this one that comes before it, or
Claro que sí, always. It's on the necklace. Yeah. No, this one's gonna be about Texas. And Jews. We should talk about Jews, I think.
I was going to ask a question
Yeah.
about Shabbat,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Shabbat sections especially,
Yeah.
like the role, especially of those sections. Like there's 3 or 4 of them. I
There's
think
3,
there's 3
yeah.
of them. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that it connects both the background of the author murders with the narrator and the rabbi, I don't know, coming to emotional loggerheads,
Mm-hmm.
but also offering like the narrator, like from those sections, the narrator kind of, I feel like in each of them like grows until like the very last one, which is at the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what is the role of as someone who doesn't know much about Shabbat except from another stoner noir, like briefly invoked in like The Big Lebowski, like what?
It's just like that.
It's just like that. Yes.
No.
Yeah. What's why Shabbat?
Well, I was really into the bit of the rabbi can't roll joints. So that was part of it, and then I feel like, my experience of Judaism, I grew up in a pretty Jewish community in Texas. We weren't like super religious in the sense of like theological, but like we just hung out with a lot of Jews and did Jewish stuff, and I didn't really think about that until I went to college, and then I came back home and I was at a Seder. For those of you who don't know, there's a Passover is a Jewish holiday for like 8 days. You can't eat leavened bread. For 1 to 2 of those days, depending on what kind of Jew you are, you basically have a dinner seminar. Especially if your parents, like mine, are professors, right? Yeah, Claudia can attest, it gets quite bad. Yeah, so you like sit around, there's a book called the Haggadah, you tell the story of Exodus, and then, depending on what kind of Jew you are, you might argue a lot. And so I feel like a lot of Judaism is like permission to be serious in a certain way. Like I feel like, for example, in my family, right, we didn't really talk about Zionism too often, even though I was an anti-Zionist and my parents were more Zionist, until Seders, and then, we would read this Haggadah that would say some really dumb shit about Jewish people's like privileged understanding of oppression, and then it's really easy if you're me to be like, what the fuck? And then my dad, and then we fight, and then there's like a part of the Seder is the 4 children. There's like different children, and then there's the wicked son. The wicked son is identified as wicked because he says something. They each have a question or something, and the wicked son says, "What does this mean to all of you?" And the idea is like if you separate yourself from Judaism, you're wicked. School. So I was saying like the suicide note. So much to explain. The first part of school is very obviously fictional. It's set at a school called a university. Everyone's last name is a food. It's very in your face, like this is a fictional world, right? And then you get to the suicide note, and the first proper noun that is like real, that exists, is Palestine, because she's giving a quite aggressive like political manifesto in her suicide note. She references like Palestine, Michael Brown, and then right, it's this moment where I feel like the fictional bubble that you're in collapses and the real world intrudes, and I think that was sort of my experience of being like in an isolated college, right? Is you live in this very fake world, and then occasionally the real world just comes like hurtling through. Well, I'm complaining about being misunderstood. I feel like, if you're trans, everyone just assumes everything you do is about being trans. Like, I think school, I don't think any of these traditions, like Jewish lit, none of that stuff makes sense anymore because we all have the internet. And if you want to talk about OK Diva, there's like essay, like, trans lit doesn't make sense as a category, right? Just because we're all trans, it's like, it doesn't unify our art in any meaningful sense, really. And there's this academic named John Guillory who has a book called Cultural Capital that came out in the 90s, which is about canon construction. And he makes this point that like most literary traditions reveal far more about the context in which they are established than the actual books being described, right? And this is true of like anything, like even like the modernists, you know, like James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, William Faulkner, very different experiences that they're having that they're trying to articulate in novels, and then like critics just kind of like lump them all together in a certain way. And I feel that way about like translit. Like I feel like translit to me is like 7 to 8 people in Brooklyn who are like writing together, right? And apologies if you see this and we were friends on Twitter, but like it's true, like, and that's like a real tradition because they work together and they collaborate and they address the same issues. But like just because I once had a penis and I wrote a book doesn't mean we're like connected artistically in this way, right? I do feel like School is a very Jewish book to me because it hinges on like anti-Zionism. It's like about Jewish people's relationship to whiteness in a lot of ways. But anyways, that book came out in September of 2023. There's a self-immolation, a lot of anti-Zionism, and then a lot of college protests, right? And then a month later, October 7th happens, Israel starts their genocide. Like, it was very strange, and I feel like many Jewish anti-Zionist people just went fucking insane, right? Because like you're trying to negotiate a lot of things internally, and then every time you try to like articulate it in a public setting, there's a lot of complicated politics, right? Like if you're on Twitter, say, and you're like trying to talk about what being a Jew is like now, then it's like, okay, you're talking about yourself and like taking up the narrative and like making this about you. And it's like, yeah, because you're doing that on Twitter, you know, which is like stupid. But like, there are like these questions people have, right? Like it's a real experience that many Jewish people have that don't need to resolve it on Twitter, but like they should think about it, I think. And so that's how this novel partly emerged, was like thinking about like, what would it mean to create American Jewish culture separate from Israel? Because you're always kind of linked, you know? And like, what would that look like? And yeah, so I feel like the third book, which is what you asked about like 10 minutes ago, is, you know, I would think about like the third book in this series of books that are just about Judaism in some way, maybe. Yeah, so that'll be in Texas, where being a Jew was quite an interesting experience. And I feel like there's much of this book is like way more explicitly Jewish, I feel like, because there's the rabbi, cheap Jewish thing, you know, everyone knows, Big Lebowski style.
Yeah.
He's always like doing the question with the question thing. I feel like it's really unfortunate we ceded the Jewish question to the Nazis, you know, because like Irish goodbye style, I feel like it does describe the main thing about being Jewish, which is like you ask someone a question and they ask you a question back, and you're like, oh, that's kind of annoying. But then it turns out to actually be quite a good way to think about things, you know, because you don't come to a conclusion. You're always struggling. It's very dialectical. It was our gift to the world. And I feel like, yeah, the other there's a really kind of kooky but fun book called The Jewish Century, by Yuri Slezkin, and it starts out with this like, he just comes in so hot. Like the first paragraph of the book is like, the experience of modernity as everyone becomes Jewish, and then he's just trying to like argue this the whole time. And then the first, that's like kind of the prologue, first chapter, and then the first chapter is about all these different ethnic groups he identifies as like Mercurians, which is like a broader group of people that come into a society and are not tied to the land through their labor. So they end up working a lot of jobs like being a merchant, trader, like anything where you're not tied to the land, right? And so this is like Jews, but also like Parsis in India, Chinese people that went to different parts of Asia, Palestinians even in parts of Latin America. Like he kind of collates all these different groups and looks at like things that unify them and their experiences and the stereotypes. Like I think it's the Chinese and like parts of Southeast Asia are called like the Jews of Asia, which is how he builds to being like at the end like, and Jews are the most of these. So it has a lot of like Jewish exceptionalism stuff that's whatever. But I feel like that, is an interesting thing that comes out of Judaism for me, is that it's been diasporic for a very long time. And like Jews are always thinking about what makes you Jewish, like the identity, right? Because for many hundreds and hundreds of years it was a religious identity, and so if you just didn't do the shit, you're not Jewish, and like problem solved. But then in the 1800s it becomes a racial identity. So then it's your mom's Jewish, you're Jewish, and then it's like you're always Jewish, and then Nazis. But I feel like everyone has that problem now of like your identity is not really tied to the land. It's also probably not tied to many things you think it's tied to, particularly if you experience it largely online, right? Like as an artist, I was saying like most of these traditions are kind of fake and artificial. But like you could go read anything you want, right? Online. If you go to annasarchive.org, there's a dash in between Anna's and archive, or zlib.fm or whatever. You can just pirate every book. And you can read whatever you want. You could spend the rest of your life reading like political economy from like Mark Twain. You could get really into that. Are you like part of that tradition? I don't know. It doesn't really make sense. And so I feel like technology has kind of like put us in this like weird abstract world where you can just draw all sorts of influences, and then like it doesn't, like critics wise, right, it doesn't really make sense to be like she's doing trans lit, or she's doing Jewish lit, or she's doing whatever.
It makes sense to lump this all together.
Yeah.
I would like to open up questions to the audience.
For
if
sure.
anybody.
What time is it? All right, we're good.
Yeah. Anybody have questions for Isabel? Anything that's coming up?
Could you talk about the cover art?
Oh yeah, I have this friend Zonpei Thing, incredible painter. She did both covers, so these two on the back. She didn't read the book ahead of time. I just gave her kind of like a list of things that would resonate, and she did a really phenomenal job with this one, on both, but like this one in particular, she lived here, so I feel like that was cool. She also went to Stanford, so it was nice to kind of be like, just think about the place you were and do your interpretation of it, and then it ended up lining well. One thing I really like about this cover is she added the nail. This was why I got the nails, just to see what that life is like. But she's like so androgynous in the book and her gender, because like she doesn't think about anything, right? So you don't really know. And she kind of talks in a mix of slangs. And then the idea that she does this whole book with nails was like, I would have never thought of that. And then I thought about it obviously after, and I was like, no, that's good. Let's go with that. So that was cool. Those are the covers.
Did you see that one freestyle Eminem did in like 2021 in like a parking garage?
Yeah, is that the one with the awfully hot coffee pot? Yeah. That's all I remember though.
I just wanted to know if that was like coming through a little bit.
Oh, in the poems? No, I think I wrote those mostly before I saw that. That was a crazy line. What is he doing?
That wasn't even the line that I remembered from that.
What did you remember?
Well, it's gone now, of course, now that I'm on the spot.
Mm-hmm.
Man, there are lots of, I wouldn't call them gems because that would do a disservice to gems and also simile.
Yeah.
But man, it sure is a rap.
Yeah. Did you see the Earl Sweatshirt tweet where he's like, if you're still listening to Eminem now, you need to stop drinking Mountain Dew and quit the army?
Yeah.
That was cool. Shout out to Earl Sweatshirt. He and I have the same birthday, so we're actually the same person.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Excuse me. In school, I recall you, I think it was in Suicide Note, the dark web.
Yeah.
That long,
Yeah.
frightening, terrifying
Sure.
passage. Where did that come from?
That came out, that section is called Serious Business. It's all filtered through a lot of things. It's a Heart of Darkness adaptation. So that was kind of funny, right? It's the most real section, and that it's very autobiographical, but it's also like the most fictional in that it's adapted from a fictional text. Heart of Darkness is Joseph Conrad's novel from the early 1900s about a guy named Marlowe who goes on a ship down the Congo looking for this guy Kurtz, who's an ivory trader, and it's a very controversial novel because it's pretty ambiguous in its relationship to colonialism. Chinua Achebe, we have some of his books there. He's a very famous Nigerian novelist, writes this essay about Heart of Darkness, which is mostly famous because he calls Conrad a bloody racist, but like the reason he says it is not. I think the like takeaway from that essay is less like Conrad portrays Africans in a certain dehumanizing way, because like it's very easy for people defending Conrad to escape that by just being like, well, it's the character's perception, it's like a representation. But what Achebe says is that what's actually racist about this novel is that Conrad instrumentalizes all of the African characters to tell a story about the deterioration of a white man's mind. And so Heart of Darkness is mostly about white people, right? In the end, then it just uses Africans in Africa as props to make this point. So when I was thinking about that when I was 21 and conceiving of this novel, I thought it would be interesting to kind of like take that very geographic story and then have it transported online. So she's going down like the river of the dark web, I guess, essentially, like, but then like using other online anonymous people as the props. And so it's about her mind deteriorating. Instead of Kurtz, Kurtz is this like enigmatic figure, and then he's quite successful at getting a lot of ivory, but obviously at horrific costs, and he lives in this village, and there's like heads on stakes, and then he says the horror, if you guys have ever heard that thing. But instead of a person in serious business, it ends up being a data set, but she doesn't know what it is, it's just KTZ, and so she's like looking for it. A lot of this stuff is like matched up to the novella in interesting ways.
KTZ, Kurtz.
Yeah, and then there's like a part where in Conrad's novel, she finds like a Russian harlequin is like the person's, something about them's a harlequin. They have a book in Russian. He like picks it up. He's like, what the fuck is this? It's Russian. And then like in that version, she finds like a password protected or encrypted novel or something, stuff like that. And that was, that's how that section like came out to be. It ends up being, there's a very hard to follow section about a horny lesbian crab at the end of that book. The crab escapes its cage and wants to go have sex with other crabs. So it scurries over to a tech company headquarters where it thinks they're eating crabs, so it can go free all the crabs and have sex with them. And it ends up scurrying through like the air ducts of the building and eavesdropping on conversations. And then the conversations piece together the plot, in which it's revealed the video is fake, the suicide note also LLM generated, it's based on a data set of canonical literature. I thought it was cool when I was 21 and planning this shit, but it ended up, confusing a lot of people, especially my mom, I think. So she's kind of my best, but also harshest reader. And that she reads and she's just like, I don't like the ending, this doesn't make sense.
Are you glad she's not here today?
No, because I'll send her the video. She's going to be like, Isabel. Well, maybe I'll cut this part out. Anyway, one time I sent her a story and she was like, why can't you write anything normal? And I really wanted to make that the blurb on the book. But I don't know. I didn't do it. I guess I was scared.
You should. Novels are, anything that has a cover on it is overly blurb in my opinion. And
Totally agree. We have way too many paratexts. It's such bullshit. Why do we have like 8 paragraphs of marketing copy? Just say what the book is. Buy it.
And what the author's mom has to say.
Literally. Yeah. Shout out Sonia.
I guess my last. Any other questions from anyone else? Yes.
Speaking of dialectics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of interested in, like, when you're writing the novel, what is the relationship between, like, when you're actually working on it and you're sort of allowing the writing process to guide where you're going versus, like, your vision for the whole.
Yeah.
In
It's changed a lot. Like, school was, like, very, very architected. I went through quite a manic period where I sketched out the whole thing for the book, like basically the structure. And then I stopped being manic, and I was like, well, I should probably just follow through on this, right? But it turns out that's actually a lot harder to do when you don't have that kind of energy. That's why it took 6 years. And so then I was like, I don't want to recreate that writing process. And so this one was like way less determined in that way. Like I kind of knew where I wanted it to go, but I kind of just let it like snake around. And then I found an ending that I liked. I'll probably do something different for the third one. I don't know. I feel like, if you just do the same thing and your life's not ultimately that different, I feel like you're just going to write the same novel a bunch of times, which doesn't seem that interesting. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Are there any quotation marks in It's the Characters?
No. They're so ugly. Everyone is always like, okay, I do the dash dialogue and I don't attribute it very often. When have you ever been in a conversation where someone says something and it's like, said Ryan? Never happens. This is what being life is like, Grow up. Also, quotation marks just look awful. They look so ugly.
You could just draw a little portrait next to every...
Yeah. Oh my god, that's so true.
Why not?
Yeah. And it would also pad out the page length, I think. Yeah, so I could write less and look like I wrote more. Sick. Love it.
We love marginalia.
Yeah, it's the best.
Any other last questions? All right, my last question is, what is a Marxist to do with narrative and with fiction?
Oh, awesome. Great, I have this poem. All right, I'm gonna read a poem. The first shift I worked at Adobe, I grabbed this book off the shelf and came across this poem. It's by a Pakistani poet named Faiz Ahmad Faiz, or Faiz Ahmed Faiz, it's both. I hadn't heard of him before, but he, I guess, is, very famous national poet there. He's often compared to Pablo Neruda, who's a Chilean poet. They share being Marxist lover boys, is what I gather. Relatable. So he wrote this poem. It's called A Prison Evening, and I'll read it out. Each star a rung, night comes down the spiral, staircase of the evening. The breeze passes by so very close, as if someone just happened to speak of love. In the courtyard, the trees are absorbed refugees, embroidering maps of return on the sky. On the roof, the moon, lovingly, generously, is turning the stars into a dust of sheen. From every corner, dark green shadows and ripples come towards me. At any moment, they may break over me like the waves of pain each time I remember the separation from my lover. This thought keeps consoling me, though tyrants may command that lamps be smashed in rooms where lovers are destined to meet, they cannot snuff out the moon. So today, nor tomorrow, no tyranny will succeed. No poison of torture make me bitter, if just one evening in prison can be so strangely sweet, if just one moment anywhere on this earth. I was like really neurotic about Marxism in fiction for a very long time. I feel like it's a funny experience to like get it from both sides, right? Where it's like fascists use art to their ends, but largely do not like interesting or good art. Marxists often sort of like denigrate bourgeois art or whatever, So what's a Marxist novelist girly to do? And I feel like that was like school was trying to figure that out. I think even after publishing school, I had some like lingering doubts about the political utility of fiction. I feel like this poem cleared out anything I had left, which is basically like, if art can make you appreciate a night in prison, then it's justified, right? And I think like one thing that keeps me grounded, I don't know, like thinking about, it's kind of pathetic, right, to be like a novelist in the global north who benefits so much from like, massive super exploitation of people in the global south, right? And like not think about what fiction can do there. Like there's this Kenyan author, Ngũgĩ Thiong'o, who wrote a very good book called Petals of Blood. And he started that book, as far as I remember, while in prison, and he wrote it on toilet paper, which is like, you know, if a novel and the project of the novel can be that meaningful in that situation, like I feel like it's probably, you know, everywhere it can be that meaningful. And it for many years I have wondered, like, yeah, like what is the point of the novel now, like with a project? But I think like obviously it has some utility. I still think like narrative, assembling things into narratives is good. Earlier I dropped the vocab of reification. I think like one way to interpret what that is like a denarrativization of everything. Like you experience everything disconnected, right? Everything is a thing. And part of the work of for Frederick Jameson criticism or for novelists is like to put things back into narratives, like in a historical narrative, right? Like to say that like whatever commodity you want, to put it in the narrative of labor relations and to like help people like make sense of things via narrative is good. Like I often have a funny experience where people come up to me and they're like, wow, this book was interesting. How did you come up with this? This is so dark and also like kind of fucked up. And I'm like, yeah, that's just what life is like for me. That's why I wrote it that way, you know? And like, so I don't know, some of it's selfish, right? It's just like me trying to figure out things. But then I do feel like there are interesting questions where it's like certain narratives don't work anymore. Like most of these, right? If you just tried to write this book, it wouldn't work because we have phones. Everything is different, you know? Like you can't do like a even stupid example, like a rom-com plot from like, I don't know, 2003, you know? So it's not gonna work if you can text people. Or like it's not gonna work if like you're on Find My Friends or whatever, you know? And so like a lot of these like narrative forms are like pretty outdated. And I feel like if you try to impose them from the top, yeah, it just rings really false. And like realism, the genre, you know, French people in the 1800s or whatever, that comes out of a very specific moment. Like Zola is always like the French socialist novel people, you know, one of them people call to, but like he has a lot more in common with like the crazy postmodern people of the 60s whose life experiences were largely determined by like drug use and advertising, in that they were both trying to articulate something about their life, right? And that ended up taking a very distinctive shape. But if I just like sat down and tried to write like Zola, it would be like neither of those things, you know, it'd be bad. I have so much more shit to talk. Can we go for like 3 hours? No, I'm kidding. We should hang out.
I'm happy to. Well, it'll be for the next. I'll save questions for your next novel.
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel. Thanks everyone for coming.
Alright, I'm gonna hang out back there. If you have questions you didn't want to ask in front of all these people, I will gladly answer them. Or we can just, you know, play music and you guys can spend thousands of dollars in this store. You can literally scan that QR code and give up to $5,000. So, or just buy all the books. Who cares?
I wish the music was working.
Yeah, no, I'll fix it. I just gotta take off the mic, I think. I know a lot, man. I got your email. I'll answer it.